Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 13th of March, 2022. It's a warm, snowy day here in the Rocky Mountains. It's up above freezing, but snow is falling still. It's just not accumulating. So I hope everyone's had a good week out there, and let's jump into our agenda and get started here. So first up, I want to talk about today's signal chain. Let me just start with that. Today we are using a new microphone, and I'm not going to tell you what the microphone is yet. Remind me at the end, Danny, and we will come back. I'd love to have people guess what microphone we're using here. If you've got some really sharp ears and you really know your different microphones, I will say we've never used this microphone in any of my videos or any of my live streams before. There's your hint. That is feeding into the Shelford channel from Rupert Neve Designs. And then that is output into my Canon C70 camera here. And then that feeds via HDMI into the Blackmagic ATEM Mini Extreme Big ISO, whatever that thing is called. And then the output of that goes to the Pearl Nano, which is our encoder, sending the audio signal to YouTube. So that's how everything is chained up today, or connected up today, and sending the signal to what you're hearing right now. All right, we do have coming up, Rob Christensen is working on an interesting and I think very exciting upcoming live stream. It's an opportunity for you to get involved. Now, one of the most important things with sound is you have to practice. You have to practice your craft to get good at it. And I want to give you an opportunity to do some practice. And what that is going to involve is submitting probably a 15 to 30 second dialogue mix that you've done. And we will have a panel of some pretty exciting experts that can help you provide some feedback on your mix. And I think you'll be delighted with who the panel consists of and the great advice that they can give you. So be thinking about that. Be thinking about audio clips or mixes that you can use to submit. And we'll get you more details as we get a little bit closer. All right. We are going to take a look at the Waves Clarity VX noise reduction plugin today. It was probably 2 months ago. Waves reached out to me and they said, "Hey, we're looking at moving into the post-production space as opposed to just making plugins for musicians and mixers on the music side. We want to get into post-production as well for video and film." And they were telling me about this Clarity set of plugins. There's the standard version and there's an advanced or a pro version, they call it. And it's made, the V stands for vocal or voice. And so it's really a denoiser made specifically for dialogue in our case. And it uses neural networks. And we'll kind of give you some demonstrations of that, show you what that's capable of. I'm actually quite impressed with what it can do. There's some other things we'll talk about there. And then we'll go to the chat here for any sort of questions that are coming up. Okay, so I think what we want to do, let's hop on over to the Mac here and let's jump in and start looking at Waves Clarity. So I have 3 different tracks here, and these are just tracks that I think Emma, actually it's Emma and Danny. But let me just play the first one here so you can hear where we're starting from. We're going to do this from Pro Tools today. And we're going to be taking a listen, first of all, to this track right here. So let me play that for you.
So recently I've been learning how to use Procreate for iPad with an Apple Pencil, of course. And that is actually a really cool and pretty powerful program. It's like everything that young me as an artist wished that she had access to. So now I am busy drawing boats and trying out all the brushes. There's this really cool like watery waves kind of brush. You can make your boat sail in a nice little ocean without having to draw water.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you heard all of the noise. So we had a fan on in the background there. So this is a pretty straightforward one. This is not super complex, but let me just show you what we can do here. We'll go into plugins, noise reduction, and we're going to bring in the Clarity VX Mono here. So this is just a really simple, straightforward one. You have just a couple of controls, really. You do have some presets here that you can choose as well. And you can do some things like So you're basically, actually, before I jump into this, let me just give you some background. So this is using a neural network at behind the scenes, and I think essentially what you're doing when you choose these defaults is you're kind of giving the algorithm some hints about what to look for. So that's one thing you can do here with those different settings there. You do have two different neural networks you can try. I would generally just start with one, and then if that's not getting you the results you want, you can switch over to two. And then you just have this big control to reduce ambiance. So you can dial it up to 100, or it starts at 0. So we'll go ahead and start at 0. I'll dial that up. And mainly what we're looking for is to see how much of that fan noise we can reduce without cutting too much into Emma's dialogue. So let's go ahead and play it again now that we have the instance of Clarity VX inserted, and let's see what we get.
So recently I've been learning how to use Procreate for iPad with an Apple Pencil, of course, and that is actually a really cool and pretty powerful program. It's like everything that young me as an artist wished that she had access to. So now I am busy drawing boats and trying out all the brushes. There's this really cool like watery waves kind of brush. You can make your boat sail in a nice little ocean without having to draw water.
Okay. What'd you think? What'd you think, Danny? You couldn't tell the difference?
But I couldn't hear the fan noise.
Oh, you couldn't hear the fan noise. Okay. You might need a little more volume on your headphones maybe, but I am curious what people thought there. I was able to hear it cut the fan noise very effectively, and at the same time, it's even at 100, it started to affect the dialogue a little bit, but so it was surprisingly transparent. And I ended up here at 67 as a setting, which I think worked pretty well for this, where we were able to remove that distracting fan in the background and not cut into her dialogue too much at all. So really pretty interesting. Again, super simple to use. And let's see what we can do on these other tracks here. So I'm going to go ahead and mute that one. We'll close this. Also, this plugin is can run in real time. It doesn't, unlike some of the iZotope RX plugins, some of those they don't work so well. Like the spectral denoise, once you kind of get to some of the higher settings, it doesn't really work in real time. It's very effective, of course, but can't necessarily run in real time. So that's a kind of a differentiating feature here, if you will. So let's go ahead and install or insert that here into the second one as well. I'm going to leave it at 0 for now. Let's go ahead and play through this one. Unmute that. And this is a similar one, just a different sample. Let's see what we get here.
Recently I had to troubleshoot some computer issues, and I am not really used to doing that. I'm an obviously everyday computer user, but I don't know much about fixing issues or, finding out why software is doing something. But the other day I was having issues with Logic, actually, because I had a weird plugin that was like messing it up. And it turns out all I had to do was move that plugin to a different storage area. But before I figured that out, I actually had to do some terminal commands, and that was my first time using terminal. Now, I don't know anything about coding really, but I was able to find the command that I needed online, and that's actually a pretty cool little program on Mac.
Okay. Are you hearing it now? No.
That's all right.
Okay, we're going to keep going. I am definitely hearing it on this side as well, so I ended up about 71, 72 right here on this one. What's interesting is I noticed that in some cases during the breaths, it didn't necessarily catch all the noise. That's a tricky situation because you've got breath plus you've got ambient sound probably in the same part of the audio spectrum, so or at least sharing parts of the audio spectrum. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult for it. But again, pretty impressive for where we're starting there. And let's go ahead and go over to our third sample now. This one's a lot more challenging. This is Danny reading a Sherlock Holmes quote. And in this case, we've got footsteps in the background. We have a phone text alert sound. And let me just play it from the start, and then we'll add the plugin after that. So here's where we're starting.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay. We threw a number of things there. So we had some footsteps. We had the fan running in the background. Are you hearing the fan on that one? Okay. And then we also had some text alert noises going as well. So let's go ahead and install or insert. God, I keep saying install. Insert.
The fan was really quiet. I heard the steps and the
Yeah.
text tone.
Okay. So let's go ahead and play through it again. This time I will adjust the settings here.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Let's keep playing there. I don't know if you all noticed that, but some of those footsteps are sneaking through, even at 100%. And I think I heard some artifacts from the text messaging as well. And those footsteps in particular are really doing this really kind of a obvious clunk and then cut off right away after the attack. So let's go ahead and try that one again. I'm going to switch this time to broad to neural network.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay. It actually did a little bit better that second time. There is still definitely artifacting. You hear some kind of swirly stuff going on in there. That was at 100%. You could probably back off some, but it did do a better job, I think, on the footsteps this time and not letting some of the attack or the kind of initial sound of a footstep make it through before it cut it off. So that was a little bit better there.
You took out some of the S in one place.
A little bit of the S, so it was sounding a little lispy. So yeah, it's cutting off some of those high frequencies in the voice when it's managing some of the noise. So they're definitely, you have to find the sweet spot. In fact, let's do one more run through and I'm going to kind of adjust this instead of just staying at 100% this time. Again, we're on Neural Network Broad 2.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay. So there's a lesson that I didn't feel like it was, or didn't sound like it was cutting as much into the S's or the high frequency parts of the voice this time quite as much. Of course, I didn't push it nearly as hard. It did leave a little bit more of the noise, but I think a lot of times the noise reduction strategy, depending on what you're doing, might be to manage the noise as opposed to destroy and obliterate the noise. Because when you obliterate the noise, a lot of times you start cutting into the dialogue and mess with the dialogue. So again, depending on what you're doing, if the dialogue is going to be sitting in a bigger mix, that actually can be okay to hit the noise really, really hard if you've got other sound effects or sound design elements sitting behind it, such that you wouldn't be able to hear all of the, all of the dialogue super clearly anyway. So just something to keep in mind there, but you can approach it different ways. So there is the first pass on that. So let's go ahead and open it up. I want to get your impressions and any questions or thoughts you have. So let's see what we've got in the chat here. Danny's going to take a look through for us. There's also the Pro version. We'll come back and take a look at that in just a minute here. In the Pro version, it uses the exact same engine for reducing the noise. You just have more controls that you can adjust the parameters for. So first, here. Does this one really differentiate from every AI denoiser? I mean, most AI denoisers are full of false positives. I think you saw in this, it's not perfect, but it is fairly effective. So the other AI denoiser that I'm most familiar with is the Dialog Isolate in iZotope RX. The one that I probably have the most experience with. This one seemed... my subjective assessment is that this one seemed a little bit better than RX. I'm sure RX will get better over time, and it's actually improved over time. It's been the Dialog Isolate has been part of RX Advanced for at least two major releases, maybe 3 now, but it's gotten better over time, and I imagine it will continue. So yes, it does. It definitely has false positives, and they're not perfect by any means, but they are quite effective, and they can be a useful tool, is my perspective on that. So yes, not perfect. Neural nets in my nested menus sounds like another day in the computer frontier. Yes, all a neural network is really it's just a bunch of correlation coefficients between a bunch of nodes. It's nothing. It's actually, I mean, it can be a useful tool, but it's not as, I wouldn't call it artificial intelligence myself. I think we can have a big debate about that, but it's just a bunch of correlation coefficients. It's a predictive model. So, Vincent, thank you for the super chat. I'm waiting when you master the Ampex ATR 102 off to your left. How's it going, Curtis? Liked your Tascam review. Spot on. Thanks so much, Vincent. Really effective. Seemed to cut in at about 60% from Nick. Yeah, that's when you really started to hear a difference for sure on those samples. Mark says, wow, I think it worked very well to cut the background noise even at 100. Yeah, I was surprised at, with steady state noise, like a fan, that's a much easier job for something like this to do. And on that first and second sample, when that was the major noise source, I think it did a really pretty nice job. And it remained fairly transparent, even up to 100%. I would probably back it off some for most of the mixes that I'm working on, but that works surprisingly well. Rob, would you use it similar to RX, maybe multiple gentle passes at different settings to dial it in on different noises? Possibly. This one, they pitch very much as a real-time plugin, so that's an interesting thing. Maybe let's try that right now. Let's put multiple instances on the third track, and let's see what we get. We'll dial each of them up to just sort of a moderate level. Let's try it. That's a great question, Rob. Okay, so first what I want to do is I want to remove these just so that we, don't have any sort of processing going on that doesn't need to. Okay, I have 2 instances. I'm going to change them both to Broad 2. Let's start at 50% on each of them. Okay, let's play, see what we get.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're going to do another round. I'm going to push them both hard. Let's see what happens.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay, that was a good question, Rob. I think in my initial sense here is that stacking didn't seem to really help. I don't know what your impression was, but I felt like we ended up with more artifacts when we stacked them like that. So I don't know that this is a case where you would necessarily benefit from that. I think from my point of view, using a single instance dialed in somewhere between 50 and 65 maybe, we would get pretty good results. So yeah, let's go back. Did we switch back to this?
I did.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
did.
So
I thought you were
sorry.
done.
So sorry about that. You were looking at my face while I was looking at the screen. Yeah, so I think a single instance in this particular case between 50 and 65 is probably about where I would go as a start. Using the two instances wasn't the same. Now, I would say that in using different types of denoisers, things that are not using neural networks, where instead they're using a series of gates, and what I'm talking about here. So for example, the voice denoise in Isotope RX, what that's actually doing is that over the spectrum of sound, let's say this is 0 hertz and this is 20,000 hertz, it has a whole series of gates, basically noise gates throughout the whole spectrum. I think it has 60 some of them. Maybe it's even more than that. I'm not sure. I don't remember, but it's actually applying gates at different frequencies at different times in a sort of adaptive way. And in that case, stacking them often or running multiple passes that are fairly mild, often in those cases you can get better results, has been my experience. With the neural network ones, we'll do some more experimenting, but from what I'm seeing right now, that doesn't really appear to be the case. It seemed to me like we were getting more artifacting when we stacked them like that. So great question, Rob. Okay, anything else in the chat there? Oh, Danny says yes, we've got more. Taking a look here.
I'm catching up.
Catching up.
So this is like before the last.
Okay. Christopher says, Rob Christensen, most people are saying it compares most to RX's dialogue isolate, but runs in real time, while dialogue isolate is post only. Exactly right. Yes, so that's the big distinction here. Tim says, I'd say it does a better job than most denoiser apps plugins without damaging the source audio too much. I agree. Rather, coloring the source audio. I agree. 100% from my experience so far. Again, fairly limited. Just got it installed yesterday and started playing around with it. But so far, so good. All right. Still impressive because there are not many plugins to get rid of such non-static noises like footsteps. Agreed. Spectral denoise can do a little bit of that. Dialogue isolate can do some of that. And of course, now this can do some of that as well, kind of with different approaches. Mark says, seems to work well with constant sounds, but passes quick bursts of energy like the footsteps. Agreed.
Okay, and then we had kind of a little bit about this, which you just did.
I will assume we'll do an even better job if you put 2 copies of plugin, one after another, but with less aggressive settings. We'll do some more experimenting with that and see how that pans out. I think dynamically adjusting, turning the noise reduction knob during playback increases the on-the-fly artifacts. Yes, I think what's happening is when you are changing it, it is having to readjust what it's doing. So there is, I think, a period of time where it's sort of figuring that out. I found that with a lot of plugins. What's interesting here is that Waves actually suggests that you can use this with automation. So if there are certain parts of a clip that are a little bit noisier, you can dial it up for that period, and then for the parts where it's not quite so noisy, dial it back down. And maybe once it processes that offline, you wouldn't get as many of those kind of artifacts, but that's a great point, Darren. And we'd have to do some, additional work to see how that pans out. Christopher, I'm hearing some pops with the double stack plugin configuration. Agreed. Definitely heard some of that, especially with the footsteps.
I don't know what exactly they're talking about here.
It's on sale for $29. Would you recommend this versus the Pro version? Well, let's take a look at the Pro version. So in fact, if we go back to the Mac here, and let's come on over to Safari. So what we're talking about here, so this is waves.com. The version we just looked at here is currently $29.99. So that, from my point of view, is an amazing buy. If you do a substantial amount of noise reduction on a regular basis, this is, from my point of view, almost a no-brainer. Now, there also is a Pro version, and as you can see, there are more controls, more parameters that you can adjust to tune the sound in, to tune the noise reduction algorithm. Let's take a look at that one here, and I'll show you what that looks like as well. Now, this one, I am not a pro with this one. We're just getting started with this one, so I need more time to play with it, but we can at least show you where we're starting here. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the advanced controls. So the first thing to note here is it breaks the spectrum up into different bands. So you get 4 different bands here. And for each of them, you can tell it how much of the noise reduction you want it to apply. So if I want to go lighter on noise reduction for the higher frequencies, I can do that. Or maybe I want to kind of take it a little easier on the dialogue range here, which maybe I would expand that between 100 hertz and 2 kilohertz. I can do that and say, hey, don't go so heavy on this part of the spectrum, but if I want to get rid of some of that high energy hissy stuff, definitely go stronger there. And then maybe also on the lower frequencies, we want to be a little bit more aggressive as well. You'll notice that this big dial changes a little bit too. You can actually dial in ambiance versus the voice. So it's doing a similar type thing to what Dialog Isolate over in iZotope RX is doing, where you get to dial in, mix in exactly how much you want. And this is really useful too. If you don't have a lot of room tone for a particular mix that you're doing, you can actually take one of the clips that does have some dialogue in it potentially and grab some ambiance from that and use that as tone, which is kind of an interesting use case as well. So we will dial that in. Process amount, you can see that kind of just moves all of them at the same time, all the thresholds at the same time. We get a chance to dial in our reflections. I don't know what that does exactly. And then it looks like we have a couple of different, one additional neural network, the broad one, high frequency, I assume that is. We can change our sensitivity from normal to high. High enhances signal to noise ratio. And you can only use that as a side chain. So that's a more complex topic that we'd have to come back to another time. We also have an ambiance gate. So in addition to what this is doing, you can also apply what I assume is something a little bit more like a traditional noise gate. So if you do have fall off in the dialogue for an extended period of time, that you can then apply this gate to also drop things down. And you have all of the typical settings that go along with that, like attack and release. And then, of course, the threshold. And then here's a main fader, basically, for the output level here. Okay, let's go ahead and try this on our third track and see what we get here.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
You can hear it pumping there. So when those footsteps were happening, you hear sort of a pumping sound. So that's where you would definitely want to dial back. Let me go ahead and run it through again, and this time I want to apply the ambiance gate and see what happens, see how that affects things.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay. Go ahead and start that over and keep playing with the settings here.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay. Interesting. So this one has some interesting settings here. I got the Actually, I'm going to go back and play. I didn't show you the ambiance setting, so I'm going to dial it back to ambiance so you can hear what that sounds like as well. The reflections is really interesting because a lot of times what happens with noise reduction is it seems like you get this very extremely dry sound. It cuts out a lot of the reflections, the reflected sound. And this dials some of that back in. So that's a really interesting thing that I hadn't seen on some of the others out there. The ambiance gate seems a little fiddly to me. That's going to take a good bit of work to get the threshold dialed in exactly where you want it. But if you have something that's really critical to save, this might be useful in those circumstances. But let me go back and play some ambiance for you so you can hear what that sounds like. We'll start at 0 and dial it from there.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have...
Okay, well that's funny. So that's not going to be like a magic bullet in terms of, or a perfect easy way to get room tone necessarily. But what I did notice is very much the ambiance was boosted over the dialogue. So the dialogue sort of started to sound like it was a little bit more in the background, and the footsteps sounded very, very prominent, as did the fan and the text notifications. So some interesting things you can dial in there. So that's the pro version, just at a very, very high level. Let's go back to the chat and see what people have to say about that.
This is from before.
From Shoji, this is from before. How do you think this compares with Noise Assist? This is a very different thing. From my point of view, this is going to be something that I would use more in post, obviously, as a start, but you could use it for live streams. What I have found with Noise Assist is if you are not close miking, then Noise Assist falls apart pretty quickly. It does pretty well, Noise Assist does pretty well for continuous noise like fans, but it struggles with things like any sort of discontinuous noise, footsteps, things like that, just like any noise reduction plugin will. So if I could only choose one, I would probably choose something more like the Waves, only because it gives me more flexibility, at least the Pro version. Noise Assist is still a really handy tool, though. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's built into the Mix Unit, where you can buy it as a plugin or an add-on to the MixPre. And if you just need to cut out some pretty continuous noise, it does a pretty good job. And you are, close miking for the most part. Once you get onto a boom mic and there's a lot of heavy ambiance, that's where it's not quite so good. Then you start to get the weird kind of fluttering effects. So it's not quite as effective there. But it's a good question, Shoji. Christopher, dialing in ambiance from most of the demos I've seen in other channels, it's pretty awful. Only really works well when isolating speech. Agreed. I'm trying to think of when I would use it. I would need to set up. It'd also be interesting to set up a side chain to change the sensitivity here to high and see what that does. But Roland says, the cleanest noise reduction plugin I've used is iZotope RX. It sounds very natural when doing noise reduction in post. I would say that this one to me sounds a little bit better than Dialog Isolate from RX, personally. So it operates more like Dialog, more like Dialog Isolate. Roland says, Noise Assist works well for me to scrub out HVAC on an MKH50 boom 12 inches above and in front of the talent at 90 degrees angle to an air conditioner 2 meters away. Yeah, for constant noise, it does pretty decently. 12 inches is pretty good, especially if you've got the back of that mic towards the air conditioning register. Sip of water time. Okay. We good there? Oh, we've got another one here from Tim. Thanks for making my first real paid sound mixer gig a great learning experience. Your videos on the 633 made it easier for me to manage the 688 we used on set. Glad to hear it, Tim. Glad to hear it went well. Cheers. Thanks so much for the super chat. Love to hear about your story sometime, how that went. Guy says, I was wondering if the Clarity plugin can help with cases where the sound is muddy due to room reverberations. Let's see if I've got a sample of that here that I can bring in. Let's go ahead and import an audio file. We're going to switch over to the Mac here. Here's a reverb sample. I'm going to add that to a new track here. We're going to mute these others. This one's open. Let me just go ahead and remove this instance here. And let's play through it so you can hear where we're starting. This will be Danny talking in a stairwell.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still...
This is right before Thanksgiving. Let's go ahead and put that plug in right here. We'll just go with the simple one right now. And let's see what we get this time.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but I wanted to make sure I used the jar.
Short answer, not really. Doesn't do much. So it's not really made for reverberation, and it doesn't seem to do a whole lot there.
Okay, we do have some more.
Okay, more going on in the chat here. Let's take a look here. What would you recommend this for? So here's my thinking. The Clarity VX, the standard version, is an absolute steal. If you're doing any sort of dialogue editing, voiceover editing, podcast editing, and you have to clean up noise, Clarity VX is a steal at $29.99 US. So, or $30 US. So I think that is the perfect use case for anyone working on video where you just want something that's super simple, really effective at steady state noise, and even taking the edge off of discontinuous noise. I think Clarity VX is a great one. Now, the Pro version, that's going to be someone who's like a dialogue editor or someone who's mixing full films, wants more control. That's where I see that one coming in and making a little bit more sense. But for me, the Clarity VX, the standard version, is kind of that's what iZotope RX Elements is missing. And here's a $30 way to add that to your kit, which would be just, I think, an amazing addition. So good question, Rob. All right, Kevin, welcome to the stream, Kevin. It's great to see you. Question, any new courses in the making? We do have a course on mixing in Adobe Audition, so sort of the fundamentals of mixing audio in Adobe Audition. I have to get some time off of work to finish it. We got started on that over the holiday. I was a little under the weather, so we didn't get as far as we had hoped, but we do have that coming here in 2022. So that's the next one in the coming up in the queue. It's good to see you, Kevin. Hope you're doing well. All right. Is there any course of any source of knowledge for deeper understanding of iZotope RX? I've been using RX for years, but still learn something new about basics of it every day. And there's a second part. Just like you said, there are 60 noise gates and voice denoise. I never heard anything about that. I have an iZotope RX course. If you go to school.learnlightandsound.com, you'll see it there. So I do have an RX fundamentals course. And Rob says great value for money. Rob actually signed up just recently. So glad to hear that, Rob. Thanks.
Okay.
Would the Pro version remove the stairwell reverb with the dialogue ambiance setting? Let's take a look. We can test that right now. So Danny's going to switch us back over. We're going down to noise reduction. We're going to get the Pro version installed here. We will pull up the advanced controls. We're going to have to dial this in. I want to probably pull down the dialogue, primary dialogue, a little bit. Let's pull that in. I think, here's my thinking. This actually restores reflections. So it does it, it says, without adding reverb, but let's see what happens. I expect My hypothesis going into this is no, this will not help, but let's take a look. Listen.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but I wanted to make sure I used the jar of yeast that I...
Yeah, I'm not really helping or hearing it really help in that situation. So if it were a way to cut reflections, it might be helpful, but this is actually restoring reflections because, again, a lot of the noise reduction algorithms will kind of give you that really dry, no reflections sort of sound, and this allows you to add some of that back. So great question, and definitely worth experimenting, like how you're thinking. All right, Shoji, if you already have RX Standard, is clarity not needed? I don't think RX Standard has dialogue isolate. And in that case, that's where I would find it useful. Let's double check that. So we're going to go over to the Mac, open up iZotope.com. We are going to scroll down. There's RX9. Oh, no. Let's go to products. There we go. Learn more. Compare RX9 editions. And if I want to find isolate, there it is. We've got 4 matches. Where is it in the list? Dialogue isolate is only in the advanced version. So that's where I would find this useful. So yeah, if you have standard version, I think this could still be useful for you. Just a really quick and easy way. Now, if you're happy with the denoisers that you have already, the dialogue denoise and the spectral denoise, I think you have spectral denoise in a standard version. Let's take a look. Danny's going to switch us back here. Let's do a search for spectral. We have the spectral editor. Spectral denoise is in the standard version as well. So if you're getting good results with those and you're happy with the way they work, then that's fine. But if you are missing that dialogue isolate, which is a really powerful tool for, it approaches noise reduction in a different way. It identifies, using its algorithms, what is ambiance and what is dialogue, and separates them and then lets you dial in how much of each you want. So in essence, you can just pull down the ambiance without affecting the dialogue in theory. So it's a really useful tool. Okay. Wait, why don't we switch back to the main, what was that? Do I want to talk about what? The microphone.
There have only been a couple of guesses.
Oh, we need guesses. What are people's guesses on what this microphone is? Let's see what the guesses are so far. Danny's combing back through. They came in a little bit earlier, so she's looking to find those again.
So far.
Only 2. Go ahead and put them up. First one from Jan. Apple AirBuds 3.5 millimeter. No. Good guess, but no. You can actually see the microphone here. This is the actual microphone that I'm talking into that's actually capturing the sound waves. So good guess. Is it a Lewitt LCT 440 Pure? It is not, Brian. I've actually have used that microphone on my channel before, so it is not that one. That's a very, very crisp sounding microphone. We actually gave that one away, probably 6 months ago or so. Good microphone for people that have drier voices or darker voices.
Actually, there were 3.
Okay,
Here's
one
the
more.
third one.
From Peter. Beyerdynamic M90 Pro X. Also a great microphone, also not the one I'm talking into today. I have covered that one in a review. Again, remember the clue that I gave you is I've never used this microphone on any of my videos before, ever. Not on my main channel, not on the live stream channel here. So keep guessing. Looking forward to your guesses. All right, let's open it up for general questions now. Shoji wins. That's it. It is the Neumann U87 AI. And let me just mute for just a second here. This is the matte black version of it. And you might ask yourself, why do you have that microphone? Why bother with something that expensive? Let me put this back on 1 second here. I'm going to mute. And why are you putting that ridiculously large foam on such a beautiful microphone? Couple of things. I think the main reason that we have this, we got a copy of this was so that I can use this as a reference microphone in future microphone reviews. I think it's a really good, it's a microphone that so many people have heard so many times. I'm going to guess that everyone here on the live stream, and as of right now, what do we have? Like 55 people on the live stream right now. You have all heard it at least once, probably multiple times. And you can hear, like NPR, for example, all of the NPR announcers are using this microphone. It's used a ton in music recordings, especially for vocals, but also for instruments sometimes too. Just a really common microphone. And so in many regards, sort of a kind of a standard in the industry. So that's why we have that here.
So here's some of the conversation.
Okay, here's some of the conversation. Let's have a look here. It does not sound like Earthworks. You're absolutely right. It is definitely has the Neumann voicing to it, which is a little bit different. Lewitt is the poor man's Neumann, so it was a very good guess, Brian. You were so close. So close. Definitely a reference standard microphone. Yes, indeed, Eric. Mark, Neumann stock is about to jump. I don't think. Well, maybe not because I bought one, but maybe for other reasons. Eric, Doug Johnson, DJP channel on YouTube, just got one recently. It's definitely worth it. Yeah, I haven't heard him using his yet, so I need to go have a listen. Doug has a great channel on live streaming equipment. He has a live production company, actually here in Utah, just down the mountain from me. Could you recommend a lav mic for capturing voices when making cooking podcast videos produced in a home kitchen? Well, I guess I'd need a little bit more information. I assume you're using a wireless system, and if so, it'd be really helpful to know which one, and also what your budget is for this. I actually, for cooking shows, I would prefer to have one of the microphones that you hang, with the ear hangers that has a little boom that comes out like this, because as a person turns around and moves, you're capturing their voice still, and you're getting a better signal to noise ratio because the microphone is so close to their voice and farther away from the other things in the kitchen. And a lot of things in the kitchen get pretty noisy, especially if they're doing anything with a food processor. So that would be my preference. However, if not, there are lots of options we can probably give you. If you could let us know what wireless system you're using, we'll definitely come back to that.
All right.
Okay.
More on the Neumann.
Back to the Neumann. Mark says, are you running it through the Shelford? Also, I am. Yes, this is going through the Shelford channel today. We're taking it easy we have a little bit of a high pass filter on. We have the compressor on lightly. It's not cutting into my voice a whole lot. It's only if I get really up on top of things here, that's when it starts to kick in. And then, yeah, on EQ, we're going really light as well. Not much, just a minus. Actually, I'll just turn it off. I'm going to mute so that in case there are any pops here, you don't hear those. Okay, the EQ module is entirely off at this point. I don't know. Did you hear a difference? Oh, you do. Interesting. It may be a little bit different now. Okay, yeah. We did have just probably a minus 3 dB cut at about 900 hertz. I have a lot of energy in my voice right around that area, and so I usually cut just a little bit on almost every mic. So it had a little bit of that. Let me go ahead and put that back in so you can hear the difference. I'm going to mute for just a moment. Okay, and now here is with the 900 hertz minus 3 dB. I think it's minus 3 dB. It's between 1 and 3 dB of a cut. It's fairly mild.
When you turned it off.
Very hot signal now
When you turned it off.
when I turned off the EQ.
Yeah. And when you turned it back on.
Big difference. Interesting how a tiny cut can make a huge, huge difference.
And I agree with that, actually. Okay, here we go.
Please bring pizza pronto, box throws, and we'll have 2 channels following the podcastage review standard. We usually stick with Peter Piper picked a peck of purple pickled peppers, and we don't generally throw boxes in our house. So, but I do enjoy a good podcastage review, no doubt, especially when the antics get pretty wild there with the box throws. Every studio here in Nashville has several of these. Like I said, yeah, it's absolutely it's about as close to a standard as I suppose you can get in the recording world, and definitely there in Nashville, Music City. 900 hertz cut is good. It is, yeah, definitely for my voice. I've got a lot going on in my voice right there, a little too much. So that cut helps a lot. You have to be careful how one processes the audio from a great mic. Indeed, you do. The nice thing about a good mic like this is that you start with you start with an audio signal that you can do a lot with, and that's where the cheap mics can be really challenging. I've heard some mics where everybody that talks through them sounds like they have a lisp, and what that means is it's not picking up some of the high frequency stuff, and there's no way to add that back if it never captured it in the first place. So that's one of the nuances. Next upgrade to a Telefunken C12. I don't know about that. I certainly couldn't sell that as a purchase that would make sense from the standpoint of using it as a reference. I don't know. Maybe probably in the music world that would be more common, but certainly in the voiceover world, well, maybe it is. I don't know. I'll take a look. Don't tell Danny. Excellent advice. Please recommend a wireless system as well. We're a blank slate. Okay. And then how about budget? So, not to make it too difficult, but let me start with something like, you could start with a Rode Wireless Go, and to that you could connect a Sanken COS 11D. And the microphone would cost more than the wireless system, but it could work nicely. I would actually look at the if you're not opposed to it and your talent's not opposed to it, look at the ear hung with the little boom that comes out. Rode makes one. It's a headset mic, they call it. It's not horribly imposing, and if audio quality is important to you, that can be a good way to do it.
Do they have to tape it?
You don't have to tape it. No, it probably is a good idea to tape at the back of the neck just to make sure. I mean, yeah, just to make sure that you don't, like, if anything gets pulled, it doesn't yank. It doesn't yank too hard.
And what kind of tape is that?
And as far as tape, you could just use Transpore tape. That's 3M. That's available at any drugstore. You can buy that. 3M Transpore, P-O-R-E. That's probably what I would look at first. Okay. Shure SL-XD to start. Not super expensive, but not cheap junk either, like most of your prosumer systems are. I think that's actually a great suggestion, Christopher. Thanks for sharing that. So the Shure SL-XD, since you're not going to be moving around a whole ton, that could be a really good one. Now, SL-XD, I think, is the one that has the half rack receiver. So it's not the kind of thing you would normally attach to a camera or put in a sound bag. But if you're doing the same, the show in the same location every time, and you have somewhere you can place the receiver, that's a great option as well. Thank you for that, Christopher. It's a good option. All right. Shoji, for $29, Clarity VX sounds like a great way to check out the capabilities of Dialog Isolate. Completely agree. Completely agree. It's interesting how Waves takes a very componentized approach to selling things, which is also a rabbit hole. Because it's like you could spend thousands of dollars and not realize it because you're only spending $30 at a time. So be careful. RX is a different thing. If you want the advanced tools, you have to buy the advanced version, which normally is priced at over $1,000 US. So they're a little bit more, it's a little bit clearer to know what you're getting yourself into with iZotope. Like, you know what the investment is going to be. With Waves, you can be adding, it comes with an app, and you could be adding new plugins all the time. And finally you realize, oh my, I've just spent $1,000.
Don't they send emails every day?
And they send emails every day with specials. I don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to talk anyone out of Waves. I'm just saying be careful out there. So, Rag and Bone Puppet Theater Point Source Embrace earpiece is pretty unobtrusive. Oh, I think that's the one where you put the lavalier comes up and it's kind of up in this area up here. That's another one that's worth checking out as well, for sure. The reason that I'm kind of pointing that way as well is that one thing that people really struggle with when they first get started with lavaliers is if they're really insistent on hiding the lavalier. That's an art, and that takes a while to develop the ability to hide it without getting a bunch of clothing rustle. And it really depends on so many factors. There's no easy way to say, just do this and you'll be fine every single time, because it totally depends on what the person's wearing, who the person is, their body, just so many factors. And so that's why those things that you can put up on the head are better, because they follow the head and they don't run into the clothing rustle noise nearly as often. I mean, if there's still a lot of clothing rustle, they'll still pick up some of that stuff, but it's not going to be the microphone capsule with clothing rubbing it against the capsule, which is just overwhelmingly loud. All right, teacher of teachers, on the mid-budget solo filmmaker side, I finally got a COS 11D from reviewing Curtis's reviews, and it is the best lavalier I have, especially into the MixPre 3 through the Rode VXLR Pro adapter. Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm glad to hear that. The COS 11D is a really durable microphone. It picks up, it produces an audio signal that you can definitely sculpt in post to get it sounding exactly how you want it. My voice sounds horrible through it, just directly into the recorder, but with some EQ in post, it cleans up really, really well. And not cleans up, but you can sculpt it, and so it sounds a lot better really quickly. I use the Rode Link. Wireless. I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be worthless or wireless. Wireless with a Countryman B6. That's a good option as well. And actually, Countryman makes an ear hung version of the B6 they call the E6. Another option as well. Have you checked out the new Cubase 12? It's coming with Dolby Atmos in the next update, and Nuendo 12 will be out soon. I haven't. So many DAWs, so little time. You can see here we were using Pro Tools today. Normally I spend most of my time in Audition. I've got Logic. That's one other thing I need to mention as well. I did install and attempt to run Clarity VX in Audition, and I'm having a problem doing that. It's doing this sort of skipping thing. So I need to contact Waves support and get that sorted out. So if you are on Audition, I don't know what your mileage will be, but I'll report back. I just need to find out what's going on there and why I'm getting that kind of skipping sound. So I can't use it in Audition just yet. That's why we did it in Pro Tools today.
For the people with the cooking show, did you want to mention you have videos about hiding?
Yes, we also, for the question about the cooking show and lavaliers, we do have several episodes where we talk about hiding lavaliers. So if you do decide to go that way, there's some things you can learn there. Just be prepared. There's a learning curve, and it's going to take some time to get that dialed in, and you may have to do some retakes. So make sure you're monitoring that audio during the cooking show so you know right then and there if you have a problem. The trick with cooking shows is that sometimes based on what the presenter is doing, you can't necessarily easily do a retake, because if they pour the whisked eggs into something else, it's done. You have to start the recipe over. So just be aware of that.
Do some test demos.
Yeah, do some test. And if you have any extra baked goods, especially that you'd like to share, please send them to the Soundy audience here. They'll appreciate them, I'm sure.
Okay. Now we have requests for mic comparisons.
Okay, we have some mic comparison requests. I'd love to hear the Beyerdynamic M90 Pro X you reviewed recently next to the U87.
And then this one.
Would be interested to in a comparison of the U87 and the SR314. Very good. Okay. I don't know if I still have the Beyerdynamic. I might have. I think I kept one of them. There were two Beyerdynamic mics. There was the dynamic and the condenser. I think I kept the condenser, which I think is the 90 Pro X. So we'll take a look at that. But yes, I definitely have the SR314 and could do that comparison here in an upcoming Sound for Video session.
Okay, we have a clarification.
Wireless with E6, not B6. I have both. Yes, okay. Thank you for that clarification. Wireless Go and the like don't give enough power for the high-end lavs. Fair point. It depends. Yeah, a lot of those consumer wireless systems, like the Rode Wireless Go, I think supply something like 1.5 volts or maybe 2 volts, so you have to be careful there as well. I think the Shure SL XD is a good choice, and also a similar one if you need a smaller receiver. The Sennheiser G4 would probably work nicely in that situation as well. I'm not a big fan of the lavalier that comes with the G4 at default, the 100 series G4. It's the Sennheiser ME2. I don't love that microphone. It works okay on some voices, but there's some voices where it just sounds awful. I would look at the Shure SL XD if you can, and something like a Countryman E6 would be kind of my dream setup. So, all right. We are, oh my goodness, we're 1 minute over. Thank you, everybody. So glad that you were able to join us today. Hope you get an opportunity to get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.